Over the last few years, one word has quietly worked its way into everyday conversations, and that word is semiconductor. Prime ministers and presidents mention it in speeches, CEOs discuss it at roundtables, and governments are pouring billions into it. Suddenly, everyone seems to be talking about semiconductors. Even so, these tiny chips are hidden deep inside devices we use. From the smartphone in your pocket and the television in your living room to cars, hospitals, satellites, and even fighter jets, modern life runs on semiconductors. But what has truly brought this term out of the shadows is the global AI revolution. So what makes these tiny pieces of silicon so indispensable to AI companies? In today's episode of The Brief, we'll answer exactly that. We'll start with the biggest semiconductor headline involving India right now, which is the ASML-Tata deal, then trace the technology, history, and geopolitics of the global chip race. We'll talk about the physics and chemistry of semiconductors, look at where India stands, and then try to assess the road ahead. Stay tuned and do leave a feedback in the comments section so we can keep improving the work we do for you. So, let's begin with the latest. ASML just spoke about India and its potential in this space. But what even is ASML? ASML is, quite simply, one of the most important companies in the world that almost nobody outside the industry knows. It is the only company on the planet that makes extreme ultraviolet or EUV lithography machines. Lithography is the printing process that draws the impossibly tiny circuits onto silicon wafers. Without ASML's machines, you cannot make a leading-edge chip. Not TSMC, not Samsung, not Intel, nobody. Do note that I'm not naming Nvidia here. Why is that? Keep watching and I'll answer that question for you in just a bit. Now, on May 16 this year, during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the Netherlands, Tata Electronics and the Dutch lithography giant signed a strategic partnership to power India's first commercial semiconductor fab, the 90,000 crore rupee Tata facility in Gujarat's Dholera. And why is that a big deal? Because ASML will supply advanced lithography technology for the manufacture of wafers at Dholera and will help establish and ramp up production at the plant. And here's the geopolitical subtext. The Dutch government, under heavy pressure from the US, has been steadily restricting ASML's most advanced exports to China. So, when ASML chooses India for a brand new front-end fab partnership at this moment, it can be seen as an economic and strategic signal. Now, what is this Tata facility? What does it make? And how does that benefit India? We'll answer all these questions, but first, let's look back into the past. Well, because what's a good story without a little bit of history? Did you know that India's serious semiconductor manufacturing ambitions began all the way back in 1984? But that's not the surprising part. The Semiconductor Complex Limited, or SCL, was set up in Mohali, and in the first year of operations, it was producing 5,000 nanometer chips. It then quickly advanced to the 800 nanometer technology. Just imagine, 4 decades ago, India was making cutting-edge chips for that era. And then, in 1989, a massive fire gutted the SCL facility. At this point, India was said to have been just 2 years behind the latest semiconductor manufacturing technologies. Now, it took more than a decade for SCL to even begin recovering. Today, SCL Mohali makes chips on older nodes, primarily for strategic, defense, and space applications, including the Vikram chip that Prime Minister Narendra Modi recently unveiled. Of course, the fascinating arc of semiconductor science began much earlier in the country. In the 1960s, right at the start of the Silicon Revolution, Fairchild Semiconductor seriously considered building a fab in India. Bureaucratic loops got in the way and the company chose Malaysia instead. Later, in the same decade, Bharat Electronics Limited, or BEL, set up a unit to manufacture silicon and germanium transistors. But cheaper integrated circuits from Taiwan, China, and South Korea hit the market, and units like this struggled. When Texas Instruments came to Bangalore in 1985, India's journey as a chip design hub began in the earnest. Through the 1990s and 2000s, Intel, AMD, Qualcomm, Nvidia, Broadcom, Texas Instruments, and dozens of others set up large design centers in India. Now, I know I'm using jargon like 5000 nanometers, fab, and chip design, but I promise I'll unpack all of this for you. For now, back to the story. As they say today, there's a little bit of Indian in every chip. But on manufacturing, India has been miles behind. And that's because building a fab is very capital intensive. We are talking billions of dollars per facility and then much more for research and development. And that is where the Tata Group comes into the picture. The Dholera fab is being built by Tata Electronics in partnership with Taiwan's Power Chip Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, or TSMC. Being set up with help from the government, it is India's first commercial wafer fabrication unit. At full capacity, the fab is designed to produce 50,000 wafers per month on process nodes ranging from 28 nanometers to 110 nanometers. These are what the industry calls trailing edge nodes. But that shouldn't be a point of disappointment. The bulk of chips that go into cars, power management, industrial systems, defense electronics, and a lot of consumer goods sit precisely in this range. The construction of the facility is nearly half done and trial production is expected by late 2026. The plant is on track to be operational by 2028, according to IT Minister Ashwini Vaishnav. Now, before we go further into what the Indian government is doing in this space and what the global picture looks like, let's get right into the science of semiconductors. This is a deeply technical topic, and for the benefit of the viewers, I'll try to simplify it. I may end up oversimplifying it, and for that, I'm sure the subject experts will forgive me. And again, all feedback is welcome. So, we know that a conductor, for instance a metal, allows electricity to flow easily. An insulator, like glass or plastic, blocks it. A semiconductor, as the name suggests, sits somewhere in between. It can conduct electricity, but only under certain conditions like when you apply current, heat, or light. And that conditional behavior is where the magic is. It means you can control the flow of electrons in a way you simply cannot inside a pure conductor. Now, semiconductors can exist in both a pure form, which is called intrinsic, and impure form, which is called extrinsic. In almost every real-world device, impure semiconductors are used. And how are the impurities added? This is done by a process called doping. In this process, small amounts of impurities are added to cause changes in the conductivity of the material. And the two types of doped semiconductors are N-type, where there's an excess of electrons, and P-type, where there are holes where an electron could exist. To put it a little too simply, these two systems help the flow of current. As for the actual design of the chips, think of your favorite sandwich with multiple layers. At the bottom sits the base, which in most cases is a silicon wafer. A silicon wafer is a thin circular slice of semiconductor. On top of that, tiny areas are created using special chemicals through the doping process, with some regions carrying negative charge and others positive. These regions form transistors, which act like microscopic switches that turn current on and off. And it is these transistors that become the building blocks of every chip. To link millions or even billions of them together, thin metal lines called interconnects are created. Then come insulating layers to stop signals from leaking into each other, contacts and tiny holes to keep the layers connected, a protective coating on top, and finally, a package is created that lets the whole setup talk to the rest of the device. Now, we keep hearing about 28 nanometer chips, 7 nanometer chips, 3 nanometer chips, right? That number refers to the size of a transistor inside the chip. A nanometer is a billionth of a meter. For perspective, a strand of human hair is between 80,000 and 100,000 nanometers wide. A strand of human DNA is about 2.5 nanometers. And the bleeding edge of the tech industry is now talking about mass producing 2 nanometer chips. But why this obsession with size? Because the smaller the transistor, the more of them you can pack into a chip. The more transistors, the more performance and at a lower power consumption. That trade-off, more compute for less energy, is the entire competition globally. You may remember Prime Minister Narendra Modi holding up a small chip at Semicon India last September. That was the Vikram 3201, India's first fully indigenous 32-bit microprocessor developed by ISRO in partnership with the Semiconductor laboratory in Chandigarh. It is fabricated on 180 nanometer CMOS technology, which by consumer electronic standards is old. But for space, it is exactly the right tool. The Vikram 3201 is designed to withstand temperatures from -55 to +125 degrees Celsius, and it has already flown on a mission. A fully Indian designed, Indian fabricated processor that has already done a job in orbit. That's the symbolism and the substance that the government has been talking about. Now, as promised, let's quickly map some more technical terms in the industry because the jargon is where the real story lies. A fab, short for fabrication facility, manufactures chips. TSMC, Samsung, Intel, and Global Foundries operate some of the biggest fabs. A fabless company, on the other hand, designs chips but doesn't make them. It outsources manufacturing to a fab. Nvidia, Qualcomm, AMD, Apple, Broadcom, these are all fabless. And that's why I did not name Nvidia at the beginning of the video, because I was reading out a list of fabs and that's not what Nvidia is. Anyway, more on Nvidia in just a bit. An IDM or an integrated device manufacturer does both design and manufacturing in-house. Intel, Micron, Texas Instruments, and SK Hynix are classic IDMs. Then there are OSATs, outsourced semiconductor assembly and test facilities, which handle the back end of the process: packaging, assembly, and testing. The big names here are ASC, Amkor, and JCET. And finally, there are companies for EDA or electronic design automation, who make the chip design software that every major firm in the world relies on. 3 companies effectively define this market: Synopsys, Cadence, and Siemens EDA. Now, where does India's strength lie? That would be chip design. And where is India's weakness? Well, that would be front-end fabs and IDMs, though with Dholera and a few other initiatives, that gap is finally starting to narrow. OSATs and packaging look like becoming a genuine Indian strength over the next few years. The Dholera fab is the headline, but the broader Indian semiconductor mission has finally started showing results. As of May 2026, a dozen projects have been approved under the Indian Semiconductor Mission, with cumulative investment crossing 1.64 lakh crore rupees across states. IT Minister Vaishnav has said that 4 semiconductor plants will be fully operational in India by the end of 2026, with 2 more coming in 2027 and the Dholera fab targeted for 2028. In the latest union budget, the government formally launched the India Semiconductor Mission 2.0. The first ISM, announced in 2021 with a 76,000 crore rupee outlay, was about getting fabs and OSATs off the ground. ISM 2.0, on the other hand, is a different beast. This time, the focus shifts to 3 things: producing semiconductor equipment and materials inside India, designing full-stack Indian semiconductor intellectual property, and fortifying both domestic and global supply chains. If you look at the current picture, at least 90% of the semiconductors India consumes are imported. Over the past 9 years alone, India has spent close to $150 billion buying these chips from abroad. If nothing changes, that bill could balloon to $240 billion every single year by 2035. Now, we must talk about another recent development here. Just days back, the Niti Aayog's Frontier Tech Hub released a report on this issue, and it holds some key insights. Titled Future of India's Semiconductor Industry, it carries the fingerprints of some of the biggest names in the chip world: including Vinod Dham, who's called the father of the Pentium chip, the Indian heads of Intel, AMD, Micron, and Nvidia, and academic leaders from BITS Pilani, other than government officials. The report says that the global chip market, worth about $631 billion in 2024, is projected to swell past $1.5 trillion by 2035. Now, the roadmap presented by the Niti Aayog makes a very interesting point. It does not ask India to play catch-up with Taiwan or South Korea on cutting-edge wafer manufacturing, a race that requires hundreds of billions of dollars and decades of accumulated expertise. Instead, it asks India to change the game entirely. The vision is to build a $120 to $150 billion semiconductor industry by 2035 by being strategically picky. It says that India should dominate where the world is moving fastest and where entry barriers are lower. That would be advanced packaging, which is the art of stitching multiple chips into one powerful system, compound semiconductors like silicon carbide and gallium nitride, which are essential for EVs and renewable energy, and chip design, where India already supplies 1/5 of the world's talent. By 2035, India aims to capture 10 to 13% of the global chip market and meet 35 to 50% of its own chip demand domestically. The country also wants to design and export affordable chips for 5G phones, sensors, and microcontrollers to over 50 nations. But none of this is going to be easy. The roadmap is candid about the hurdles. Complex AI-driven design tools that cost a fortune to license, a severe shortage of specialized engineers and cleanroom technicians, enormous water and electricity needs, the difficulty of earning trust from global buyers who have stuck with East Asian suppliers for decades, painfully long periods to set up fabs, and staggering capital requirements. India will need $135 to $180 billion in investment over the next decade. Now, let's look at who India is up against and who it is partnering with globally. In manufacturing, Taiwan's TSMC is the undisputed leader. It produces roughly 70% of the world's most advanced chips. As of 2026, TSMC has officially moved into 2-nanometer production at its Taiwan fabs. Samsung Foundry is in the same 2-nanometer fight, and Intel is trying to re-establish itself simultaneously as a chip designer and a fab. Then there is Rapidus, the Japanese consortium that includes Sony, Toyota, NEC, and others. Backed heavily by the Japanese government, Rapidus is targeting 2-nanometer mass production at its Hokkaido site by 2027. IBM, which in 2021 unveiled what it called the world's first 2-nanometer chip-making technology, has partnered with Rapidus and is also collaborating with India on semiconductor research under a 2023 agreement. On the fabless side, Qualcomm leads in smartphone processors and modems. AMD competes head-on with Intel and Nvidia in CPUs and GPUs. And Broadcom dominates networking chips. In the memory space, the three giants are Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron. Applied Materials, a US company, supplies many of the machines and materials that fabs themselves run on. And the lithography pyramid sits with ASML at the top. And then there is Nvidia. It deserves its own segment because Nvidia is now the most valuable company in the world by market cap. Its stock hit an all-time high of $217, pushing Nvidia past the $5 trillion market cap. Yes, you heard that right, $5 trillion. All of this comes from Nvidia's dominance in GPUs, or graphics processing units, that power AI data centers. Nvidia sells these GPUs to cloud hyperscalers Amazon, Microsoft, Google, AI labs, automakers, research institutions, and many others. Originally, GPUs were designed to render heavy images and video, and those of us who were into PC gaming remember Nvidia for its graphic cards. But their ability to perform a vast number of parallel calculations turned out to be precisely what AI training needed. Right place, right time, and Nvidia got there years before anyone else. So, how does India actually stack up in the global race? Let's look at the numbers. India's semiconductor market was about $38 billion in 2023, $50 billion in 2024-25, is expected to touch $63 billion in 2026, and is forecast to hit about $110 billion by 2030. The global semiconductor market, by comparison, is expected to cross $1 trillion by 2030. India's slice is meaningful, but the world is also growing rapidly. Tata's Dholera fab will produce chips at 28 nanometers and above. The government's stated vision is to eventually enable manufacturing of 7 nanometer chips in India, but officials admit that is 7 to 8 years out, and even that is an ambitious target. Meanwhile, TSMC is already producing 2 nanometer chips, Samsung is right behind, and Rapidus is also gunning for 2 nanometer chips by 2027. While the gap is real, here's the nuance that often gets missed. Roughly 75 to 80% of the chips the world actually uses every day, whether it's in cars, appliances, power systems, or defense electronics, are on mature nodes between 28 nanometers and 180 nanometers. And that is exactly where India is building. So the strategy isn't to leapfrog global players. It is to build a credible, scaled, sovereign supply of the chips the Indian economy actually needs, and then build from there. There's one more story underneath all of this that's worth talking about. For 2 decades, software ran the tech narrative. Apps, operating systems, the cloud, hardware quietly faded from conversations. Remember when we used to obsess about hard drive sizes and RAM specs on our home PCs? That talk completely faded. Moore's law, Gordon Moore's 1965 observation that the number of transistors on a chip would roughly double every 2 years, actually carried us for half a century. But with AI demand exploding, the appetite for compute is now outpacing what classical transistor scaling can deliver. And that has opened the door for hardware to come back into conversations. GPUs, memory, advanced packaging, and the fabs that build all of this are back at the center of geopolitics and corporate strategy, which is also why every major economy is throwing tens of billions of dollars at semiconductors all at once. The thing to see now is what could be the next hardware revolution. If data centers and AI tech can be packed into much smaller and much more energy efficient infra, that game could completely change all over again. And that's all for this episode of The Brief. If you found this useful, do like, share, and subscribe. And if you'd like to give feedback, good or bad, please do let me know in the comments section. Thank you for watching.